What would you put in your backpack if you had a new coaching engagement but could only take a limited number of items? Each episode, the Coach's Backpack looks at the multifaceted world of coaching and asks a new guest to tell us what they would take with them and why. Hi, I'm David Lowe, and this week we're taking a peek inside the backpack of Coach Dr. Rob Kemp. Welcome, Rob.
Good morning. Good morning. Thanks for having me on.
Well, thank you for coming. I'm very excited about this, our final episode in this series. So let's crack straight into it. How would you describe what you do in under 20 words?
I'm a coach who does other things like supervision, consultancy, and writing.
Okay. Well, and I'm going to dig into some of those. We're not going to cover everything, Rob, because you obviously have a broad repertoire. So this is the premise of the podcast. You've been asked to coach a new client, but you're limited to what you can take with you. So you've got your essentials, your clothes, your toothbrush. In addition, you can take one book, a tool, technique, concept, method, approach, or whatever you want to call it, one other item of your choice, plus a person from the past or the present to accompany you. You can take these in whichever order you wish. What are you putting in your backpack, Dr. Rob Kemp?
Yeah, I mean, the notion of the backpack, it's an interesting one. Like, what would I have with me? And the reason I find it, I guess, challenging to say what would be in my backpack is I kind of see myself going into coaching pretty much with what I have on my back, right? The clothes on my back, kind of the knowledge in my head, the presence of me, that's all I really have when I go into coaching. So when I saw the questions that you had, David, I was just kind of considering what I might take in with me.
I was worried you were going to say I'm getting rid of the backpack then. I was going to say this blows the whole podcast up.
You know what? I couldn't do that, but not challenging the notion of going in kind of actually only equipped with ourselves was one I couldn't resist. Just kind of.
And you take just to be good, you take your toothbrush, Rob. I mean, no one wants a coach that hasn't done their teeth, so you're going to have at least a toothbrush in it, right?
Yeah. Okay. Toothbrush, toothpaste. I'll give you that.
But a naked Rob Kemp is going
naked coach.
He's naked coach. Jamie Oliver might sue you, but yeah.
He might. Yeah, as might Desmond Morris or Who's Naked Ape. Yeah, I mean, the book that always springs to mind for me is The Complete Handbook of Coaching by Cox, Bakarova and Clutterbuck. And I hadn't come across this book until, I don't know, a decade ago, maybe a bit more than that. So why would I take that book in with me? I mean, I think it's one of the great books of coaching.
You know, you've got your doctorate now, though, Rob, and you don't need to say this. Like Tatiana can't take it away. She can't take it back.
She can't. No, she can't take it back. No, I just think it's a great book. And for me, it helped answer some of the questions that were posed to us when I did my master's in 2013. I think I graduated. The kind of questions of like, well, what sort of a coach are you? And I remember a very erudite professor saying to this group of 15 or so coaching master students, so what sort of a coach are you? And you could literally hear a pin drop. You could have cut the silence with a knife, where nobody in that room could kind of articulate what sort of a coach they were from a kind of theoretical perspective. So why would I take that particular book in with me to this new client? I think for me, because it reminds me that there are a myriad of different approaches that you can take with a client. And it begs the question, well, what is your approach and what drives that? Because, if I'm a positive psychologist, David, and I always take that kind of approach with people, what if the client doesn't respond to that? What if it's not where they want to be? And I do remember one of the worst coaching sessions of my life, where I was doing a pos psych exercise with someone, looking at kind of the feedback, positive feedback they'd had from other people, the things that they were good at. And they hated it. They hated it to the extent that after the session, they dropped me an email and they said, that was horrible. That was like one of the worst experiences of my life. I mean, slightly grandiose. I'm sure it wasn't one of the worst experiences of their life, but they were really uncomfortable with that kind of approach. And I sort of, I looked to myself and went, well, I think it's a good exercise. But they didn't. So the complete handbook just is something you can take into sessions, whether actually or metaphorically, that says you need to meet the client where they are, and I think when you look through the different theoretical genre that the book covers, it gives you that breadth of approach, to get into narrative coaching, maybe to get into some gestalt, to get into kind of some psychodynamics, it's a very broad church. So I'd like to take the complete handbook as a reminder to me that I have as a coach, if indeed I have the knowledge in those genre, I have a wide variety of approaches that I can take, and that judgment can be made in the moment rather than I'm this sort of coach and this is the sort of work I do with people. I just think it's a great book.
Okay. It's in there. It's in that backpack. It's safely stored away.
Okay.
Now, I've got loads of questions about the research you've done, but I don't want to preempt your next choices because maybe they're going to lead naturally into your research. But I do want you to tell us a bit more about that. So you choose whenever you wish to bring it in, but I'm going to dig into it at some point just to warn you. So let's see, what else are you putting in your backpack?
So the next thing I'd like to put in my backpack, if I may, I don't always use it, but I have used it quite a lot over the years in some sort of one-to-one coaching, but also in some big schemes where I've been a scheme lead, is a tool called Engage. When you coach in organizations and around organizations, you come across a lot of tools, whether psychometric tools or measurement tools or 360 tools, and a lot of them are based around trait. So kind of who you are.
Yeah.
And you could think of many, couldn't you? Myers-Briggs, or Insights Discovery, or whatever, OPQ 32, whatever. They're all about kind of the traits that we have as human beings. And I've worked with a lot of those because kind of people come to you with those sort of things done. Here's my MBTI and these are my letters and all that sort of stuff. Personally, and as a coach, I find those things a little bit of a turn off. And I find them a turn off because they sort of say this is who you are and this is fairly stable throughout your life. And if you want to get on better with this task, or if you want to get on better with these people, then you need to be a little bit less like yourself and a bit more like someone else. And I'm like, I don't really want to be a bit less of myself. I actually want to be wholly myself. Thanks very much indeed. So I find them a little bit demotivating as tools. Not saying they can't be useful. Of course they can be useful, and I've had very interesting discussions based on them. But I became much more interested in state than trait. So not who you are, but how you are at that particular time in that particular context. And the tool that I'd like to bring with me is called Engage, and it looks at three major constructs of confidence, openness, and impact. And I've done this on a large scale, kind of hundreds of coachees in a scheme. And I just love the tool because it gives you a real kind of quick start into coaching. And of course, confidence is important in anything that we do. Openness is important in terms of communication, in terms of learning, in terms of change readiness. And impact and emotional commitment with an organization is important for kind of workplace performance, of course. So I like it. I've used it a lot, and I'd like to use it with this new coachee to give me some insight into where they are, how they are in their context, in terms of their confidence, their openness, and their impact. So it's a tool I've used, I recommend, I like, and I've pretty much always had good results with it. So that's what I'd like to take, please.
And did you make up the more state than trait? Because if you did, you need to trademark that as a little catchphrase.
Well, it's kind of, I guess it's sort of, common parlance within the, occupational psychologist, but I'll have it though.
Damn. So, I mean, I was just thinking of those of, okay, but where does this fit in? Where does that fit in? But actually, most things fit in one of those three categories, don't they? Confidence, openness. I mean, impact was the one that I was thinking. So this is impact of everything from their engagement with someone else to their impact on the work that they're doing.
Yeah, it's a good question. And so impact in this context is more like how successful the people see themselves in their environment at the moment. If they're doing it as a self-report, you can do it as a 180 or a 360. So how successful do other people see them? But
Mm.
the self-report is how successful do I see myself in my environment? How kind of emotionally connected am I with the organization that I work for and its aims and objectives? And a very interesting construct or part of that construct is intention to stay. So in an organizational context, like, am I going to stick around with this organization? Do I
Yeah.
feel emotionally close to them? Do I feel successful? That's really what impact is talking about. And do you know what, David? As a coach, for me, it's really, really interesting to look at those kind of reports because, particularly around openness, like one of the areas around openness is how likely is somebody to see benefit in developmental activities like coaching, right? So if someone scores really low, they self-score
Mm.
really low on an area that's really critical to the coaching process. It's just brilliant to get into that conversation early doors.
Mm.
It's like, okay, these are your answers. This is how you see yourself. Like, it looks to me as though you don't see much value or you don't have much hope for this kind of activity
Right.
being of much benefit to you. Should we have that conversation, without any kind of judgment? Like, let's talk about your experiences of
Yeah.
development in the past. Let's think, talk about whether you've had coaching before. Let's talk about why your expectations might not be high. And rather than that being a kind of hidden thing within the relationship, it becomes an open and rich source of conversation and coaching. And where that has happened and where I have done what I've just described, it's really opened things up. And rather than us just doing the dance and both kind of pretending that we're doing something, we actually really start doing something. And that does actually, David, relate to my area of research in coaching, which is that of emotional labor. So, emotional labor is the labor that we expend in adhering to some norms or the norms as we perceive them around coaching. So, what does a coach look like? What does a coach sound like? What does professional coaching look like? So that little kind of cameo or scenario that I just painted for you of a coach, for example, feeling as though someone isn't fully engaging, that they're not really showing up there, a coachee who's part of an organizational scheme and isn't that bought into it, but they're playing the game, they're doing the dance, they're giving the expectation, they're fulfilling their expectations of what their organization is investing in. That little dance is around emotional labor. And I guess one of the things that the findings of my research is around the kind of authenticity piece, like finding this coaching space that's really authentic for coach and for coachee. And so that engage tool helps to kind of unpeel, unlayer, destigmatize some of those fundamentals around coaching and perhaps allows both parties to be more truly authentic with each other about the reasons for being there and what might be achieved. So I'd love to take that tool in. It does a lot of things. And incidentally, if you're coaching, if you're a scheme lead or you're an L&D person or an HR person or a commercial person who wants to measure the impact of their coaching within their organization, of course, it's notoriously difficult to do, isn't it? Because there's a qualitative element and there's a quantitative element. And what Engage gives you is the ability to look at a scheme level on movement in those constructs of confidence, openness, and impact over a period of time. So what I've done in the past is I've done an Engage survey at the beginning of coaching. So that's where we are. We've engaged in coaching for 6 months, 7 months, 9 months, whatever the period is. And then we've measured again that point in time with Engage at the end and seen where the shifts have happened in terms of confidence, openness, and impact. So it's a kind of quant, kind of quasi quant sort of measurement, but it gives you that movement and shift. Put that together then with other qualitative and quantitative measures, and it starts to build a good compelling picture of why we might invest in coaching in organizations, because it's the perennial question, isn't it? Coaching costs money. It's a big investment in terms of
Yeah.
time, effort, expertise. Why should we do it? So yeah, I'll pop that in my backpack if I may,
Mm.
alongside the complete handbook.
And so many things have come out of that, but I know we've got limited time. So the last thing you said there of being a measure of progress, that conversation comes up so many times with people. How do I measure, or how do I, not necessarily how do I measure effectiveness of a coach I'm hiring, but often the coach themselves are asking, how do I prove that I'm being valuable to the organization? And most people agree that it's, well, let's get the client to be the judge of that. But this adds some kind of structure around it, albeit subjective still. Emotional labour, though, I want to jump back to just quickly. So emotional labour, this recording today is the culmination of 2 years of me haranguing you to come onto it for future guests. Basically, this is what I do. I finally break people down, so you can't resist too long. But you gave examples of display rules. Coaches often think, oh well, I'm me. I'm not faking it. That authenticity. We talk about that. It must be congruent and all of that. But everybody puts on some kind of display, right?
Right.
And so, but I can't remember any more about it. So I'm not sure if I'm leading us down a complete rabbit hole.
No, you're not at all. I mean, that was my rabbit hole. That was my thesis. So display rules, are around those things which we believe we should be displaying as a professional coach. So take a profession where there's a much higher consensus of what the display rules are, and a lot of the research around emotional labor is in the healthcare settings, as an example. So take the role of a nurse. What is a nurse meant to kind of look and behave like? They're meant to be caring, efficient, busy, prim, proper, whatever the kind of
clean.
clean.
You don't want a
Uh,
scruffy old nurse turning up, do you?
right, right. And so there are some really clear sort of display rules for that. Empathetic, caring, patient, all those things. But for the profession of coaching, where do we derive our rules from? Like, is it from the professional associations? Because they don't really say much about it, actually. Is it from our training and education? Is it from our theoretical position? Is it from other coaches we see? Like, where do we get our display rules? How are professional coaches meant to present and be? And I think the problem is that people derive their own sense of what being a professional coach is from a variety of sources. And so what for one coach would be anathema, for another coach is their stock in trade, right? Take your area of humour. I use humour a lot in coaching. If it isn't funny, then it's not, probably not worth saying. For some coaches, that would be seen as really unprofessional. Very, very unprofessional to be using humour in that way in your coaching. And your area of research hopefully will kind of tell us something about the use of humour in coaching. But if I'm a very humorous person and I like joking around and I find joy and pleasure in coaching, if I don't think I should be doing it in coaching, then I'm expending emotional labour by not doing the thing that I would naturally do. And so this idea of display rules is really, really interesting. And I think the other area that came out of my research was this idea of how coaches present to organizations when they are seeking work, when they're seeking to be selected as coaches. And I had so many examples of coaches saying to me, well, I know what appeals to these guys because I used to work in these industries. So I'll do a nice one pager, and I'll dress really nicely, and I'll kind of say the things that I know will motivate them. And maybe I'll even kind of be complicit in an agenda that I don't fully agree with in order to get the work. And then I can go and do the real work of coaching with people. Well, for me, that's a problem, right? And I'm not being critical because I've done the same thing myself, right? I've been part of that kind of, complicity. But as a profession, if we continue to do that, we risk all sorts of personal and professional reputational issues, very much like, and I know I've used this example before, I may have even used it when I presented in 2022 when you were there, David, but it's this idea of like a plumber. You've got a leak in the house and you call a plumber, and the plumber turns up and they agree a timescale, a cost, all that stuff. And then we agree to pay for the work. They come back and they notice there's a problem with the central heating system. Now, there is a problem with the central heating system. It's good work that they do, right? They fix the central heating system, or they facilitate fixing the central heating system, and they leave. The problem is the tap is still dripping, and that's the work that we contracted to do. Now, there are lots of problems with that analogy. It's rooted in deficit and all those things, but you get what I'm trying to say. As coaches, we pile into an organization to get work. We get work, and then we go and do different work to that which was agreed. And this phrase, in order to do the real work of coaching. And so as coaches, we're determining what the real work of coaching is, not the people who are paying and contracting for it. So that's a problem. And also in those situations where we're pitching for work or going in to be selected as a coach, or going and selling solutions, coaches find that a really difficult space, because it's almost the opposite skill set for coaching. You want to be seen as confident, articulate, able to speak, all that sort of stuff. Well, actually, are those important things for coaches? Well, probably listening's a better skill.
Yeah.
Probably questioning the paradigm that you've been brought in to work on is probably more aligned with what a coach would do. And I couldn't find any examples when I did my research of coaches going in and saying, I know that you think this is the piece of work that you've got, but let's really dive into that to understand what it is. Let's bring the coachee into this conversation. Because at the moment, I'm having it with HR, L&D, and a senior leader. And the coach's voice is out here somewhere. So from an ethical perspective, is that even how we should be setting these things up? So it was a fascinating time and a fascinating piece of research as I listened to other coaches' stories about those scenarios, comparing that with my own experiences and thinking, wow, yeah, I see more clearly now where I was in those scenarios. And there's a whole ethical perspective that I wasn't properly considering at the time. So if my research has done nothing other than get people to question the kind of work that they do, how they achieve that paid work, and a more authentic conversation with buyers, contractors, stakeholders in coaching, then that will be a positive contribution in its own right, I would say. Yeah.
Right. So we must move on to find out what else is in your backpack. The question I normally ask at the end of the podcast is, if people want to know more about this, where can they go? But I think this is a valid question here about this specific point. So if people want to look into your research, into emotional labour and those kind of things, of course, your 60-something thousand word thesis is available. Often, although beautifully written, I'm sure is not the most approachable way of reading about it. So where can they go to find something more about this?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. The theses are written for a specific purpose. They're probably not the ripping yarn that we might want. I mean, you can find a sort of 6,000-7,000 abridged version in the International Journal of Evidence-Based Coaching and Mentoring. That'll give you a kind of snapshot at, still though from an academic perspective. If you wanted something a little bit sharper and snappier, you can just look up at Coaching at Work or Coaching Perspectives, where there are sort of 1,500 word articles, which will, if you like, give you a flavour of what we're talking about without having to get deep into methodology or literature or.
And we can put some links in the description of this podcast to help people as well. So,
yeah.
Cool. Okay. So we've got two more things for your backpack: anything and a person. Obviously, the person doesn't actually need to go in the backpack. Okay. They don't need to be shorter and lighter than you.
Yeah. So anything I like and a person. I find the idea of taking a person in with me slightly odd.
But you're taking them along with you. They don't need to go in with the client. You
Okay.
could, you could have them waiting outside, or you could travel with them, or you could have them, just with you. They're going, because you don't know how long you're going to be with this client. It could be some time, right?
Oh, okay. I like that. That makes more sense to me. They could wait outside menacingly, ready for it.
They could be cooking your meal back in your apartment or wherever.
Well, now we're talking. Now, personal chef from a coaching perspective, a person whose presence I would value being around me, particularly when I was coaching. And that's the late and great David Megginson. For anyone who had worked with him or been taught by him or met him, he was a towering presence, not because of his importance, as a sort of founding father of this profession in the UK, really, and certainly of the EMCC, but just because of his generousness and gentleness as a person. You could feel his warmth towards you. Yeah. And so if there was somebody who I could take along with me, David Megginson would be someone who I wish I could emulate their level of generosity and presence. So yeah, as sort of teacher, guide, sage, or just a thoroughly lovely human being, yeah, I would have liked to have taken David Megginson. Yeah.
Hey, well, you can.
Thank you. Thank you
He's
so
there.
much.
He's there with you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, part of his presence does live with me anyway, right? Part of who he is sort of lives with me as a coach, just because I admired him so much as one, and as a coach, an academic, a teacher. And there are sort of other people that I kind of carry as well, sort of on my shoulders, Couldn't not mention Tatiana Bakarova again, such a towering presence, intellect, mind, such generosity, such acuity of thought. These are the kind of people from our world that I do carry with me anyway, somewhere internally, both kind of intellectually, spiritually. These people kind of live with me, I would say. So I'm not trying to squeeze two in the backpack, David, but just saying they do live with me anyway. Yeah. Yeah, and those are sort of some of the people I do see as the I can't remember who wrote the phrase, but the mamas and papas of coaching in the UK. The mamas and papas. Yeah, the clutterbucks.
I've never heard Tatiana sing.
No.
Are we not talking that mamas and papas?
Well, you know what? You could ask. You could ask. And then on Coach's Backpack, you could say, and which song would you sing to your clients?
Mm. Well, and I mean, I'm hoping to get Tatiana on the podcast soon. Maybe I could even ask her to sing us. Okay, I feel like I'm getting sidetracked here. Okay, so Rob, you've got one more thing, which is anything, one other thing.
A random thing to take with me in my coach's backpack. I think I will take something sugary and sweet, like I don't know. I'm a bit of a fan of a marathon. I think they're called Snickers now, aren't they? Or a Mars bar. And I'll tell you why. There is method. I get so kind of engaged and engrossed in coaching, and so much of my energy goes into those sessions in lots of different ways, that I often come out of a coaching session thirsty, hungry, and in need of a bit of a sugar boost. And I, sometimes question, actually, should coaching take so much of your energy such that you need a bit of a sugar boost at the end of it? And my answer to myself is, we coach who we are. I can't give any less of myself. That would feel like shortchanging them and shortchanging me. So a bit of glucose and stuff that isn't very good for you after a coaching session would be really nice. I would rush to my backpack and go for the Snickers. Yeah.
Can I offer you a bit of advice, Rob?
Mm.
This is a theoretical thing. Why not take a selection box rather than one chocolate bar? Because then, you don't want to have the Snickers every time. Bit of variation.
And who'd have thought that you would have looped back to question one, which was, which book would I take? Well, I'd take the complete handbook because it's a smorgasbord. It's a selection box. It's great advice, David. I will take it. You're like a packet of Heroes or a Cadbury selection box.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great bit of
advice. Although, and I don't know where you see it, this is definitely going off piece, but no chocolate selection thing with a bounty in it for me. Where do you sit on the bounty? I mean, don't sit on a bounty. That's a terrible idea because it's going to make a mess of your trousers. Yeah, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, I like a bit of a bounty.
Do you?
Yeah, but I mean, I don't want only bounty. If it's a choice between bounty and Snickers, it's going to be a Snickers. But as part of a selection, I enjoy the coconutty difference that a bounty brings.
Oh,
Yeah.
just get going. It looks like foot shavings. That's all I can think of. And now, hopefully, all of you will get rid of the bounty. Okay, your backpack is packed.
Nice.
How are you feeling about your backpack contents?
I'm feeling good. I mean, I think it sort of speaks of both sort of eclecticism, and it speaks to the energy that goes into coaching. It speaks to my love of the profession and the love of what I do. It speaks to the fact that sort of we are all works in progress as coaches, and that we could constantly need support and things to inspire us and to support us in our work. So yeah, I feel good about my backpack.
Good. Well, I'm going to ruin that now because this is all very positive. My next question, though, you've packed this backpack, but sometimes people help you pack. I don't know if when you're going away, people help you pack.
Yeah.
Sometimes stuff might get put in your backpack that you don't want to be there. Like for me, it would probably be a bounty. But what is the one thing that you would want to make sure was not in that backpack and you're leaving behind?
Mm.
Aha! Thank God you didn't it?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and it did get me. It got the cogs whirring. So I need to think of an item related to it. I'll tell you what it's about for me. It's about kind of leaving bits of myself behind. So, and I'm thinking specifically about ego.
Right,
Um,
not foot shavings.
Not foot shavings. I'd take foot shavings. I have no problem with foot shavings or bounties. Yeah, so my qualifications, my doctoral certificates, my, all that sort of stuff that's about, the celebration of me. I don't want to take any of that stuff. I want to just show up as Rob, here to work in partnership with you to do the best work that we can do together. So imagine I had a trophy or a cup that was, isn't Rob a great, human being? I'd leave that behind because that's not anything to do with the thing that we're about to do. And yeah, so I'd leave that stuff behind, both actually and metaphorically. Yeah.
This is a podcast, so we should clarify you are currently wearing your doctoral robes and hat. No, he's not. He's not. I'm only joking. Totally stitching you up there, Rob. You don't even have Dr. Rob Kemp on your Zoom title either. This is, you're totally not blowing that trumpet.
No, I mean, I'm on LinkedIn. I put myself as Dr. Rob Kemp and stuff like that. I haven't changed my credit cards or my passport. There you go. So I'm clearly not so wrapped up in it. But it's the idea, isn't it? Of I think we can get led astray by self-importance, and I think some of us are perhaps more prone to that than others. Someone sent me something on LinkedIn the other day saying, "Come to my workshop on imposter syndrome and underconfidence." And I'm like, I literally wrote back to them and went, "I'm really sorry, but my problem is exactly the opposite. Megalomania, narcissism, and kind of self-obsession." And she kindly wrote back and said, "I can help with that too."
Brilliant. Brilliant. Well, I mean, I'm going the full. Once I've got this doctor, I'm going the full doctor. I'm going to make people bow in my presence, Rob.
Yeah.
Through that.
I mean, it's a clear motivation for doing it, but people don't bow. That's the problem.
They will.
You can't make people bow. They will bow before me.
Yeah.
And my doctorate in such a specialist and niche topic that no one really understands what it is. Yeah.
Yes, they should. Well, the sword that I will obviously be wearing from that moment onwards, because you get a sword, right?
Sword, ceremonial dagger, a skiandoo.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, right. One final question then is: where do you hope you are or are not heading for this fictional gig?
Yeah, where do I hope that I'm heading with this coaching assignment, aka gig? I'm not thinking of country or geography or industry or sector. I'm thinking more about the nature of coaching, kind of what it's there to do and the time that it takes to do that. And so I'm hoping that this work is taking us to a limited time where the things that somebody wanted the coaching for are achieved in that time and it's done, whether that be 4 months, 6 months, whether it be a year. I definitely don't hope that it's taking me into a long coaching relationship of a few years, as some people seem to have. because I think there's a time for this sort of work that is limited. And so then putting that into a bigger context of kind of my life, I'm 55 years old now. I've probably got 10 years left doing the kind of thing I do now.
God, you said that. I thought you just meant 10 years left, full stop. I was
Yeah,
thinking, God,
well,
this is
yeah,
very definite, Rob.
where, for whom the bell tolls, who knows? Yeah, I got, a decade in me of doing stuff. And I do want it to be filled with those kind of short temporal kind of assignments with people, because when coaching finishes, hopefully it means that you've achieved something together and that
Mm.
partnership has done something positive for them. And so I want to do that widely, as widely as I can. So yeah, it would be about time for me rather than anything else. I don't mind going anywhere for coaching, particularly, apart from the obvious difficult places in the world to go at the moment. And of course, the whole world has changed in terms of accessibility, in terms of being able to talk to people in different climes. So yeah, for
On
me,
that,
yeah.
can I delve into that? So,
Mm,
of a lot of stuff, your research was on emotion. I don't know how much of your work is now on emotion as a result of that. With thoughts on online versus in person when you're talking about and dealing with emotions?
yeah, yeah. There's a lot of work on this at the moment, and a lot of people looked into it. Yeah. What is my view?
And it doesn't have to be based on research. I'm not
Mm,
going to look for a reference, just totally what you think in your head about it.
I think that there was a big difference between when we weren't allowed to meet and therefore we coached exclusively online. And there were people within that period who I still have never physically met, but I feel a strong bond and connection to
Mm,
because of our time online. So I think the fact that we weren't allowed to do that created a different kind of dynamic within the virtual space for coaching. However, since we are allowed now to meet people physically, I feel as though the virtual somehow lacks something. So if you were to ask me what my preference would be, it would be probably hybrid. If you're coaching someone for 6 sessions, I'd probably like to do start, finish, and middle together, and then maybe a couple of virtual sessions in the middle, based on nothing other than n equals one personal preference. Yeah, I think there's something about meeting a human being in a physical space that does something differently. And you talk about some of the theoretical genre of coaching, and you're talking about gestalt or somatic coaching or body work. You can't do it really much of that virtually, or it certainly misses a large component. So my preference would be probably for a hybrid now. Yeah, that would be my limited observation across
mm,
that time. Yeah, and of course, let's not even talk about AI, because there's a whole other debate there, isn't there, about you know. I'm very convinced that AI, will be taking over the world, of course, and impacting on the world of coaching as it already is. And I have no problem with that because I think AI does something for sure.
mm,
Whether it can be legitimately called coaching is another question
mm,
entirely. And
mm,
I guess my view would be it does something. It isn't coaching. It shouldn't be called coaching. Whether it be called, computer-assisted personal development or whatever you want to call it, right? But to conflate human coaching with AI coaching is a mistake. So yeah, virtual AI, all that stuff, useful. The future, it's going to be part of what we do. I'm not a luddite. I'm not going to try and pull any plugs. What I'd like to do though is to create some clarity. And I think as a profession, we haven't done ourselves any favors, because if we can't crisply articulate what coaching is, then how on earth could we defend the coaching space against AI? So we need to do a much better job of being clear about what it is that we do. And then it'll be very obvious whether that can only be done by a human or whether it could be done by a human and a machine. So yeah, very, very current, very topic. Everyone's talking about it, of course, and we'll all have our personal views. But I think as a profession, we just need to professionalize. What are we offering? What is it that we're doing? Yeah, and it's time. In fact, it's 20 years past due where this sort of work should have been done. And there are a lot of people looking at this now. So Tatiana Bakarova being one of them. Her recent paper in the International Evidence-Based Journal of Coaching and Mentoring was about just this, really. It's like, well, what is this for? What's organisational coaching for? Is it not time that we had some clarity on this piece, please? So yeah, I'm hoping that we can smarten up as a profession in that regard, so that we don't get into those awkward party conversations, David. What do you do? I'm a coach. Oh, right, yeah, like a life coach, are you? No, I'm not a life coach. Oh, right, sports coach? No,
Yeah.
I'm not a sport. Like, I work with people in organisations or individuals, who want to think about where they are in the world and their performance. One of the most crushing moments in my life. Of course, I'm exaggerating, but my wife and I were going to New Zealand, pre-kids, of course, because now we don't go anywhere, and for a nice 6-week kind of camper van holiday. And I got to the passport desk, passport control, and in my passport, my profession was coach. And the guy's face lit up. He was like, "Oh, mate, that's amazing. What do you coach?" I'm like, "Business." He just literally slammed my passport together and gave it back to me. I should have just said, "Yeah, rugby, mate. Yeah."
Yeah. There was only one answer that they wanted.
So yeah,
to then tell you that you weren't as good as their team's coach, obviously. Yeah.
Of course. Yeah.
On that note, Rob, look, this has been so enjoyable. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
if people want to get in touch with you, or want to know more, or want to hire you for such a gig, where can they go?
You can hit me up on LinkedIn. I'll drop an email address in there. I've got a few. So yeah, let's just put it in the deets at the bottom, and people can happily hit me up.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Rob Kemp. I'm going to use it even if you don't. Thank you for joining us on this episode of The Coach's Backpack.
You are most welcome. Very enjoyable, and I encourage everyone to who's asked. You might as well just say yes, because you are going to get hounded. So thanks, David. Appreciate it.
And thank you for joining us on this episode and on this series of The Coach's Backpack. If you would like extra goodies such as free tools, offers, further information about our guests, and even maybe the odd peek inside their actual backpack, sign up to our mailing list at thecoachesbackpack.com. And don't forget to follow the podcast too.